Depictions of controversial topics in fiction cannot be judged universally. You can't just say, oh, fiction shouldn't tackle controversial topics at all because it's going to be uncomfortable. Well, no. Every depiction of controversial topics in fiction is a case-by-case basis. Sometimes you can create something that is good and emotionally moving out of controversial topics, or you can create something that just leaves a bad taste in your mouth. We don't really know until the creators tackle them, which is why we should allow writers to tackle pretty much any controversial topic. Go right ahead, tackle it in any way you want. What matters is that they have the ability to do it and they have the right to do it. Experimentation is absolutely encouraged in creating your own fiction. Writers need room to experiment. It's like being in a sandbox. You won't know how to make a good sandcastle until you get into it. And sure, with a little bit of practice, you can certainly be good at making one. That's where I'm coming from when writers deal with controversial topics. I want them to try to tackle them, experiment with them, and talk with people to see whether or not this is a good way to tackle the issues or not a good way to tackle these issues. So when somebody asks if fiction should tackle controversial topics, my answer would absolutely be a yes. Should Michael Haneke not make funny games because it's a violent movie? No. He should. You can absolutely disagree with the message that he's conveying, but disagreeing with the message requires you to watch the actual movie to understand what he's trying to say. Should hatred not be made because it's a game about killing innocent people? No, I think it should be made, even if it is a garbage game. Should garbage comics like Mockingbird not be made because it spews political nonsense? No. The criticism isn't that you cannot make feminist comics, go right ahead and make them. The criticism is that they're bad. They're just really bad. It's absolutely not fine to preemptively tell people, hey, you shouldn't make that before even seeing the final product. For God's sake, Michael Bay is trying to make a Dora the Explorer movie. No, I'm dead serious. Google it yourself. My reaction isn't, holy shit, you shouldn't do that. My reaction is, what the hell? What has gone through Michael Bay's head to come up with this brilliant idea? College humor? Today I will introduce you into a phenomenon of a certain group of people that will go into fiction for tackling controversial topics and just instantly declare them as bad, simply for tackling them. I call this bad by default, in which someone goes into a fictional work tackling controversial issues and just declare that it's a bad story. A couple of examples that I can think of would be the depiction of Naoto from Persona 4, which is apparently transphobic. Again, so many missing context and misunderstanding of her character, straight up, wow, that's transphobic. I've discussed this phenomenon in my last video. Even fictional works that pander to them, like the trailer for The Last of Us 2, which I also tackled in my last video. Polygon complained that it's way too violent, even though this is exactly what they wanted. More women in fiction. But I guess they haven't considered the fact that women being put in horrendous situations is also women in fiction. And then some people criticize Yuri on Ice for queerbaiting and not tackling the gay issues as much as they wanted, despite the anime being everything that they wanted. These people cannot be pleased. There's never going to be a point in which they say, yes, I am cool with this. There's always something that bothers them. And they can give multiple dumb excuses like, oh, you cannot joke about this. Oh, you need to explore this story even more, even if it detracts to the overall story. Oh, this is too offensive. Ironic that the people who complain about controversial topics in fiction are always the same people that say, hey, fiction should tackle controversial topics. Well, here's fiction tackling controversial topics. Oh, I didn't like them. Well, be careful what you wish for. You just might get it. Now, don't get me wrong. People have their own biases when dealing with certain controversial topics. I have my biases as well. However, I don't go into a creator and just preemptively tell them, hey, you shouldn't make this stuff just because insert incredibly dumb reasons here. I think people can definitely make controversial stuff. We can have the discussion of their merits later. But I don't think we should have the discussion that they should be made because you said it yourself. We should tackle controversial topics. We should be brave and be controversial, right? With all of that being said, let's talk about David Cage. Oh god, David Cage. You all know him as the creators of overly melodramatic cheats like Fahrenheit Indigo Prophecy, Heavy Rain, and Beyond Two Souls. All of these games I consider overly melodramatic cheats, and I absolutely love them. There's something about how David Cage tackles this story that pleases me. I don't know if it's the poor direction or the horrendously garbage writing, but I just cannot put a serious face every single time he tries to do drama, or even write human beings with actual characteristics. I think the problem with David Cage is that he's unable to create a balanced tone. When it's happy, it's overly happy. When it's intense, it's overly intense. When it's dramatic, it's overly dramatic. It's always overly something with David Cage. And I think the overly meter takes into a whole new level when I'm supposed to just accept that Ellen Page is a freaking CIA agent. But I have to admit, the way they presented Detroit Become Human was pretty damn interesting. I'm less interested in the child abuse story and more about how the outcomes can be different. And the trailer shows an entire freaking flowchart. You're presented into a scenario in which your choices can give lasting consequences. The trailer does a really damn good job in selling the game. It shows a discomforting situation of a child abuse story, and then later on, the trailer shows that you can change this and you can make a difference. Frankly, I think that's a great trailer, regardless of what I think of David Cage's previous work. It shows a scenario and what you can do to change that horrible scenario when you buy the game. I want to see where they're going with this because both Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls, despite their cheesiness and melodramatic tone, have choices that would give lasting impact, like permadeaths and even multiple endings that aren't influenced by the push of a freaking button. Can David Cage finally set up the right tone with Detroit, or will he just continue his garbage, overly melodramatic writing? I am genuinely curious. When the game is released, I will probably buy it just to see where he's coming from, and if it's going to be cheese like the last two games, I will still enjoy it. I will especially enjoy it when I can stream this game and enjoy it with you people, but that time is not now. So today I want to tackle an interview between Eurogamer and David Cage, which a lot of people have mixed opinions on, and it has made them to do something that they cannot believe they have done: defending David Cage. For the record, David Cage is not really a praised figure in the gaming industry, but this article made people to defend him, and I find that interesting. So let's check it out. Oh, and by the way, I highly recommend you guys to check out the Paris Games Week trailer version of the game before we proceed even further, so that you can understand further context. Link at the bottom, it's only 3 minutes long.
David Cage is no stranger to controversy. Through the 20 years of Quantic Dreams' existence, an anniversary celebrated after last night's PlayStation Showcase that kicked off Paris Games Week, the French studio always made games that push at various boundaries. The trailer for Detroit Become Human, Quantic Dreams' forthcoming PlayStation 4 game that explores the moral implications of the rise of artificial intelligence, was perhaps the developer's most controversial yet. A short, often brutal look at chapter of protagonist Kara's story, in which scenes of domestic abuse and child abuse feature heavily.
Wait, so Heavy Rain wasn't controversial? It's a murder mystery that has sex QTEs, permadeaths, people cutting parts of their body off, incredibly brutal death scenes, and Saw-like trials that Ethan has to go through in order to get Sean! Hell, don't even get me started with Fahrenheit. That thing is a total freaking mess. The exploration of ethical treatment of artificial intelligence is a topic that has existed in many fictional works before, most notably Blade Runner. Child abuse is also a story that has been explored in endless number of fiction works before. To think that this is David Cage's most controversial game is a clear sign that the writer has never played any of David Cage's previous game.
It made for uncomfortable viewing, and having seen the scene play out in full and through different permutations, illustrating the branching paths of Detroit Become Human, I can say I feel any more comfortable with it, especially when it's complemented by the sight of producer Guillaume de Fondomir dramatically gesticulating with the controller as he plays through. Are such issues fair game for video games? And perhaps more pertinently, is Detroit Become Human exploring them responsibly?
You know, how fiction explore themes responsibly is the sort of question that you should ask after you play the full game, not when you're only watching the trailer. And again, watch the trailer if you want to understand full context. That trailer is pretty freaking harmless. Standard abusive father affair that happens in a lot of fictional works before. How can you look in that trailer and think, this topic is kind of controversial and I don't really know if you should tackle it? What? Are you stuck in the 50s or something? If that's your mindset, you really need to see more movies, because movies have done things that are way more messed up to children than what David Cage did. Also, just a little bit of PSA, just in case you're making narrative-driven games, your writing needs to be better than the movies, because you're a video game. You're several degrees above movies. You cost a lot more than movies. If your writing can be done better in movies or TV, then why should people even bother spending money in your narrative-driven games? You are removing gameplay at the cost of the story. Make the gameplay freaking worth the sacrifice. And so far, the number of games that managed to pull this off haven't gone beyond the number of the fingers in my hands.
Have you had a chance to see some of the feedbacks of yesterday's trailer? No. It's been mixed. I think it's fair to say, some people have applauded for going where it went, some are saying it's a bit too brutal and a bit too much.
The only mixed reception that someone has here is your article, because people are not sure in whether or not they should defend David Cage, even if what he's saying in the interview is perfectly valid. I don't know where you got the feedback, oh god, the trailer is a bit too brutal and a bit too much. The video uploaded to YouTube is overwhelmingly positive, and the comments consist of people saying that the game looks fantastic and they're fans of Quantic Dreams, which I'm sure you guys are there. I'm sure there are people who genuinely like Quantic Dreams' works. Unfortunately, the reception is not mixed. You can't even get that part right. You're just projecting yourself to make him think that people's reception of the trailer was, oh, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Sorry, but most people have seen enough fiction to know what the trailer is. Just very standard abusive father story. Nothing wrong, nothing controversial, and most importantly, nothing new. You journalists are stuck in the freaking 50s or something. And then for some reason, the interviewer decides to make a moral freaking grandstand.
Domestic abuse and child abuse is quite extreme as these things go.
Yes, but it's nothing new. There's nothing new about domestic abuse in fiction. It's a very standard affair that has existed in a lot of fictions before. Why are you treating it as if this is a controversial subject just now? This isn't controversial at all. And here's the thing, if you don't like David Cage, that's fine. But I want you to put your biases aside and think for a second. Is David Cage really doing something controversial with that trailer? What kind of person would look at that trailer and go, oh my god, domestic child abuse, that's controversial? Ignoring David Cage's previous work, this is a narrative-driven game, which means that it's going to play out like a movie, and movies have done child abuse stories that are way more fucked up than this. You know, if I'm the one who does the interview, I would be asking game-related stuff. Like, do you really make this game in a flowchart and consider the choices and consequences that the players will make? Have you considered every option? Can new playthroughs of this game be different than the last? Instead, the interviewer asks questions that would only make sense if we time travel back into the 50s, where moral panic surrounding violence in fictional works are trending. I'm gonna skip to David Cage's answers here. He basically said that, well, there are further contexts in why she's there, why she's the POV character, and why the story happens. I think his answer is quite valid, but the interviewer has to push him.
I'm not disputing that at all. The concern that I have is that it's using something like domestic abuse and child abuse, which is a very real issue for unfortunately far too many people, and using it as window dressing rather than exploring the ramifications of those issues.
And how are you able to judge that if you haven't even played the full game? You know what else is a very real issue for unfortunately far too many people? Terrorism. God knows how many modern shooters have exploited that. If you say that domestic abuse and child abuse are real issues for unfortunately too many people, should stories in fiction be limited to things that are not real or not real issues that people suffer through? How are you supposed to relate into the characters if the issues that they go through aren't issues that we can relate to in some ways or the other?
So why did you choose to use domestic abuse to illustrate these points?
That's also a really stupid question. David Cage's answer is basically, well, the story of domestic abuse is emotionally moving, and this isn't just window dressing. There's further context, story, and reason behind all of this. That's a valid answer, and again, you cannot judge all of that based on the trailer. Despite already having the answer, the interviewer still goes even further.
I was in the demo just then, and there's motion control in this. You're shaking the controller to prevent the abuse, which didn't seem appropriate to me in a scene as powerful as that.
So is pressing a freaking button. What's your point? It's not appropriate? So? Video games have trivialized many serious issues with just the press of a button. You can kill people with the press of a button. You can save the world with the press of a button. You can torture people with the press of a button. You can hack with the press of a button. So many serious issues that video games tackle to that are trivialized into nothing but the press of a button. I think you should learn what serious issues that video games, in at least the past 5 years, have trivialized into the press of a button. The best example would be the infamous press F to pay respect. The most memed of memes in the past couple of years that are still fresh even to this day. And finally, the interviewer concludes with the dumbest question.
Finally, is nothing off limits as far as you're concerned as a writer?
David Cage's reply is basically my reply, in that every writer has limits, including him. There are games that he wouldn't make, and that's fine. You can choose to not make certain video games in certain topics. There's nothing wrong with that. There is something wrong in not making certain video games due to peer pressure from certain overly sensitive moral guardians that think certain issues are just unacceptable to explore in fiction. Frankly, I should tell these people to go watch more fiction. If they think that fiction is supposed to be entertaining, they need to understand that entertainment comes in many forms. You can be entertained by playing video games that make you powerful, games that make you scared, games that make you uncomfortable, games that make you laugh, games that make you insert emotions here. Fiction will and should explore many different ways in how to incite some form of reaction towards its audiences and keep them entertained throughout. That's how entertainment works. The scenario in the Detroit trailer does indeed show abusive relationships, but it makes sense in context. For some reason, some people are becoming overly sensitive of issues that are nothing new in fiction and has been tackled to death many other times. Terrible interview, Eurogamer. Try to pick someone who isn't overly prudish and care more about the gameplay next time. And while David Cage isn't exactly the best writer in the entire world, he is allowed to make whatever story that he personally finds moving. We're gonna get to be a judge on them later, but before that happens, let him make some movies. I mean games.